Hi everyone, welcome to How to Crack XAT video for XAT 2024 from IMS. So before we start talking about how to crack XAT, let's just try and understand what is the XAT scores accepted by. XAT scores are obviously accepted by XLRI, Jamshedpur for its BM and HR program both. Obviously XLRI being the most prestigious institute of India, one of the most prestigious institutes of India. And there are many other colleges which accept the XAT scores. We'll have a list later. Now, let's talk a little bit about how the test is. The test is obviously an online test. It became online in 2018. For the last 6 years, it's been an online test. Structure of XAT in 2023 compared to 21-22 has changed slightly. So we'll talk about those changes as we come across in each section. The first thing which you see is that the total number of questions have now become 76 instead of 75. That is, verbal ability has 26 questions, that did not change. Decision making has 22 questions, which changed by one question. Up till now, there always used to be 21 questions, and now there were 22 questions. QA and DI is a single section which has 28 questions. What is the marking scheme? Obviously, there is a +1 for each question and negative 0.25 per question. It being a 5-option exam, there are 5 options in each section for each question. Part A, there is a negative 0.1 after the first 8 questions which are unattempted. Now, a lot of students talk about this and, they fret over this a lot and waste their time thinking, oh, should I attempt more questions and so on, so on. I'll be very frank, I've been doing this how to crack XAT video from quite some years and I talk about it every year. Do not even worry about that negative 0.1. You attempt the test as you would have attempted it. That means attempt as many questions as you want to, and the ones which you don't want to attempt, just leave them. Because the number of the negative quotient which you will get through the unattempted questions will be much lesser than if you attempt questions by force and you get the negative marks. So it's a very decision-making kind of thing XAT has done. They want to confuse you by putting that negative 0.1 over there. So please be very careful. I have a very simple logic, as I said. Just don't think about the negative 0.1 and attempt questions only on the logic of whether I know the question or not and how you would have attempted it generally. Okay, so let's go ahead. Please keep that out of the discussion now. Now, let's talk about the XAT 23 test structure, or the second part, the part B. Obviously, I didn't mention it earlier, but the test has two parts, part A and part B. Part A, what we saw was 76 questions. And now part B is where we have the GK section, that is 25 questions for part B. GK, the best part is there is +1 or no negative marking. Now, if there is no negative marking, what do you know? We always have been discussing this. Whenever there is no negative marking, you have to attempt all the questions. Simple rule. You will mark an answer to each and every GK question. And finally, it's a GK question. It should not take you too much time. If you don't know, it is just a guess. You have to take some guess and go ahead. So GK normally 15 minutes for GK should be more than enough, and essay writing is another 10 minutes. Now, scores not used for percentile calculation. Part B scores are not used for percentile calculation. So your percentile comes only from part A scores. Part B scores will be considered by XLRI for PI rounds. Other institutes, whether they want to consider it or not consider it, they will tell you separately. But most of the other institutes don't consider part B scores. That is considered only by XLRI. Okay. Now, let's go ahead. Let's talk about the percentile cutoffs, which we had seen last year. So we've divided this whole table into two parts, that is for engineers and for non-engineers. Within that, we have put male and female. And for XLRI BM and XLRI HRM is what we have put the cutoffs for. You will notice that the cutoffs are not very high, except the overall cutoff being close to 95 percentile in a couple of cases. Otherwise, the sectional cutoffs are not very high. So it is a test where the sectional cutoffs are not very high. So in fact, what does that do? It makes it a very good test for people who are weak at one section. I'm not saying that that is an easy exam, but suppose if you are slightly weak at quant and you could not crack other exams because the sectional cutoffs were high, this exam, the sectional cutoff is only 75 percentile, and you'll realize that the score versus percentile mapping, that getting a 75 percentile in quant or in verbal would not be very, very difficult, and hence it becomes a test which is can be taken by those people also who are weak at one section and are very strong at the other section, so that they can do well in the overall test. And the same thing goes for DM, because DM is a section where a lot of students, falter, or because it's a new section, you haven't done that section before. But the lower percentile kind of help you clear cutoffs very easily. Let's look at now the score versus percentile mapping for last year. So you can see that 99 percentile in quant is approximately 20 marks, 20.5 marks. Well, remember, but that's only out of 28. So it's not a bad score. It's a pretty high score, but that's 99 percentile. And as we saw, the cutoffs were pretty low, 75, 80 percentile, which is at 10 and 11 marks, which is roughly 35, 40%, maybe even lesser. And same way, you can go through this slide, you can pause your video at this slide, go through based on your category, male, female, engineer, non-engineer, what area, what is the cutoff, and then in each section we will talk about the cutoffs, and we'll talk about how do you go about achieving them. Right? You can notice in DM the cutoffs are pretty low because, as we said earlier also, it's a slightly difficult section. Now let's talk about overall strategy. There is no sectional time limit within part A. So you have a total of 165 minutes, and this 165 minutes you can use whichever way you want. Now, that's sometimes a boon also and sometimes a disadvantage also. Why? Why is it a disadvantage? Let's first talk about that. It's a disadvantage because simply what happens is that students don't realize when to end a section. Suppose quant is your good section and you started with quant, and you get carried away into one DI set or a particular question of quant, and you waste a lot of time not realizing that you have to attempt 2 more sections also. So hence sectional cutoffs we know are present. So what we are suggesting over here is that spend 45 minutes on each of the 3 sections. That should be a first part. 45 minutes for whichever your favorite section. There is no such rule you should start with A, B, C. You can start whichever way you want. I would not start with DM because very frankly, I don't want in the starting, I want a shock or whatever, unless you practice enough DM. So spend 45 minutes on each of these 3 sections. That is what we would do. I would start with, in my case, obviously, I would start with quant because that being my strong section. Spend the remaining extra time on whichever section. Now, there are 2 ways to do this. If you feel that within 45 minutes, you've cleared the cutoff for all 3 sections, then I would then try to go and maximize score through my best sections. And preferably that section is not DM. Okay. The reason I'm saying that preferably that section is not DM is because, see, we've studied for all the exams for quant and verbal. Now, we don't expect you to do very well at DM. So DM, if you can clear the cutoff or just be above the cutoff, that is great. You can maximize your score through your better section, that is either quant or verbal. Or if you feel that you haven't been able to do good enough to clear a cutoff, spend that extra 5-10 minutes in a particular section and clear the cutoff. There's no point getting a 98, 99 percentile and then missing the DM cutoff by a mark or so. I would rather spend that extra 10 minutes on that DM section and even get an overall 95 percentile is okay, but spend that extra 10 minutes on DM and get my cutoffs clear. So please remember that that is very, very important. Okay. Overall strategy, obviously, very obvious that start practicing mocks. Now, only when you practice mocks will you realize your strategy, because otherwise what happens is, you will never know what strategy to use. Are you timing yourself properly for 45 minutes and so on? All these things are going to be very, very important. You'll need to have your own watch on that day, right? Because a lot of students nowadays, because of their mobile phone, are not used to wearing a watch. So you need to have your own watch. So what does IMS give you in terms of test? 5 full-length IMS XAT mocks and 3 sectional decision-making tests. So that is extra above that. So you have that much. Past XAT papers are available on our website, and with the last 3 years, we even have the video solutions available. So you can use that. This is all for IMS students. Last 3 years video solutions are also available. Please use them, which will help you understand how do you go about the DM section and so on and so on. Okay. For GK, you have the GK compendium, which is at my IMS GK Zone. Exam wise, you can go through XAT GK and you can practice regularly a little bit of GK. GK is something, see, very frankly, I'll be very frank, something which you have done, you can't change too much in 1 month. You can practice a little bit, but very frankly, you can never compete against somebody who's been reading a newspaper for the last 20 years, right? Because there is not only general awareness that is not present GK. You can also have static GK, something which happened 10 years back, 15 years back. Now, that will not happen through newspaper reading for 1 month. You cannot compete against somebody who's been reading for 20 years, remember that. So let's look at the VALR section now. Now, VALR has 26 questions as we discussed earlier. The logical reasoning now, even though the name is VA and LR, please remember the logical reasoning is nothing like the logical reasoning of CAT. So please don't confuse yourself and say, okay, there will be enough logical reasoning questions, I'll attempt those, even though I'm weak at verbal. It is everything is mainly verbal with some amount of critical reasoning also involved. So it has 14 RC questions first part, which out of which 9 were medium and 5 were difficult. This was XAT 2023's data. Now, 4 RC passages with 3 questions each and 1 poem with 2 questions each. Now, this is one place, where a lot of people have been fretting and saying, okay, poem, we're not very good with it. And one of the years, the poem was very difficult. But in fact, what has happened in some of the years, the poem is not very difficult. And those 2 questions can be very easy to solve. So don't just leave a poem just because it is a poem. Treat it like one more RC and see how you would go about it. Obviously, understand that even the RCs, the difficulty level of the RCs is slightly different than what it is at CAT. What happens in CAT? First of all, there are 4 questions in every RC. So when you look at one RC, you are able to solve 4 questions. While here, the passages are slightly smaller. There's a little bit more critical reasoning involved. So practice critical reasoning really well. And if you're good at critical reasoning, you should do well at XAT overall also. So 4 RC passages, 3 questions, slightly smaller RCs. And because there are only 3 questions, your decision-making ability, which RCs are you going to attempt and which you're going to leave, also becomes that much more important. There are definitely some inference-based questions in the RC, so they are not all going to be straightforward questions, obviously. Now, 12 verbal ability or reasoning questions I would call, here the average level of difficulty we would say is medium, not very, very difficult. And this can be your savior kind of thing. 5 critical reasoning question. Obviously, that's the biggest, as we said also earlier also, that critical reasoning in verbal, in XAT is very, very important. You really need to practice this part very well. Obviously, the same logic, it continues in the DM section also. DM section over the last couple of years, the amount of quantitative ability has gone down. In fact, last 4 or 5 years, there was hardly any, there was not even a single set with quantitative ability, except last year in 23, they had 1 set. So that we'll discuss. So critical reasoning helps in DM also. 2 parajumbles, 1 fill in the blank, but 1 fill in the blank with 3 blanks in it, right? 3 grammar. Grammar, 3 to 4 sentences or 3 to 4 questions, which according to us are easy to medium if your concepts are clear. Now, these are, sometimes very straightforward questions, but you just need to be very good with grammar concepts. So if you haven't done that, that's a good time to revise that too. So I would, say that you need to have a mix of some amount of RCs to attempt and some verbal ability questions to be done, and hence you should be able to get roughly a number of good attempts will be anywhere between 15 to 17. Cutoffs being 8 to 10 roughly for a 80 percentile. You can go back to the earlier table based on your category and see what cutoffs you are needing and work accordingly. So see that, sometimes, people, again, they unnecessarily take too much pressure that I need to score a 90 or 95 in verbal and I'm weak at verbal. But maybe you're a female non-engineer and you might not need to score so much. Okay. And hence look at all those things, and maybe the cutoff for you might be only at 72 percentile. You want to do HRM, cutoff might be only at 70 percentile. So look at those things. I'm talking about sectional cutoffs and not overall cutoff. Okay, let's go ahead. Now comes the main part of the XAT paper, the decision making section. What is it? Let's see what was there in XAT 2023. There were 8 cases. It's like an RC. There's a case. Instead of more RC is more like an article or something. This is a case study. So when you go to an MBA college, you'll talk a lot about case studies. They're similar case studies. 6 of them were 3 questions each. That is total of 18 questions, and 2 with 2 questions each of 4 questions. Small, easy to read passages. The passages are never very difficult to read. See, when you look at DM, when you read the passages, you will feel, oh, what was the big hawa about? Why are people worrying so much about it? It's not the passages. It is always the questions which are a problem, and more or less at least 2 or 3 options will feel that they are all correct. So small, easy to read passages, types of questions, ethical dilemma, business decision, and last year 1 set on critical path, quantitative DM, making a comeback after nearly 4 years. So can there be quantitative DM? Maybe not, but you cannot be sure. You'll have to practice a little bit and hope what you practice for DI and CAT also helps you here. Now, understand one simple thing for decision making. Don't take guesses on your answer. People who have some work ex will always find decision making that much easier than the ones who are freshers. So don't take guesses on your answers, or when you look at an answer key, don't say, oh, this answer though definitely looks wrong. I would suggest that go through all the video solutions which we have for this and the workshops which we have for decision making. Do that. Go through the analysis of the answer really in detail and understand how the answers are being arrived at, which is very, very important. How is your mentor or whoever is teaching you, how are they arriving at these answers? That is very important. Unless you do that, I think decision making will be a big problem. Yes, the quantitative DM set will at least have definite answers and sure you know that these are the answers. But otherwise, especially the ethical dilemma cases can always be an issue. Something which might look right at one case might look wrong at the other side. So ethical dilemma is, you always need to be on the right side of the ethics. That is very, very important, unless there is some life-saving thing for the other person. That means if you go wrong a little bit on ethics and you can save a lot of lives, then that much ethical dilemma is allowed. So you have to be very careful in ethical dilemma questions, and that is where the biggest trap in decision making is. Now let's talk about the making the cutoffs. Good attempts 14 to 15, which means we're talking about approximately attempting 5 cases. Right, which is not less. You need to attempt 5 cases in 45 minutes, which means you have roughly 9 minutes per case, 9 to 10 minutes maximum. Expected cutoff around 7 to 8 marks, which is 75 percentile. Now, this is a slight relief. You need to score 7 to 8 marks. That means if you actually do 3 or 4 cases also, well. But remember, here you can't take chances. What you feel is right might not be right. And hence, you will need to have some buffer or bandwidth in terms of your cutoff. So don't just attempt 2 sets or 3 sets and say, okay, I have attempted 3 sets, 9 questions, I should get 8 right. Very difficult to think of that way. Accuracy in DM will always fall to roughly around 60% or 50% like that. So don't assume that you will get right a question just because you think it is right. Sectional difficulty, we are definitely calling it a difficult section. So no ways that it's even a moderately difficult section. And obviously, it's a very unique section. It's something which you see only in XAT, and it's been there in XAT for many, many years. What happens is people don't touch this section even till the month of December, and suddenly in 1 month, they have to do everything. So see a lot of videos around this. That is my best suggestion for you. Difficult to clear cutoff in designated time, and hence that extra 5-10 minutes you need in this section, please use it. As I said earlier also, no point getting a 99 and 99 percentile overall and missing the DM cutoff by a mark. Rather, get a 95 with clearing all cutoffs. That is going to be very important. Coming to QA and DI section, my favorite section. Now, 28 questions. Last year, things changed. Up till last year, for the last couple of years before that, there was a standard 4 DI sets with 3 questions each, a total of 12 questions. But last year, things changed. It became 2 DI sets with 3 questions each and a total of 6 questions and 22 QA questions. My favorite tagline for this year. XAT QA is not as difficult as it seems or as the perception has been built up. Don't think that it's too difficult, XAT, or just everybody's told you that XAT is always very difficult, quant is also very difficult. Yes, it was difficult at the time. So if somebody looks at a 2011 paper, which you should not look at, will say that was very, very difficult. It was one of the worst papers I had seen. But last couple of years, the quant has got pretty easy. In fact, I would say it is much easier than even a lot of other exams ka quant. Yes, there will be a couple of difficult questions, but we know what to do with them. We need to just leave them and get the other questions okay. Right? Sectional LOD, that is why I'm calling it easy to moderate, not very difficult. In fact, I found DI a little bit more difficult than quant. So if you're good at quant, attempt more quant, less DI, and plan it out well. Well, if you're weak at quant and you're good at DI, then go for DI. Now, let's talk about the QA DI section. What was it? Arithmetic had 6 questions, out of which 4 were easy, 2 were medium. Geometry had 6 questions, 2 easy, 3 medium, 1 difficult, and so on. We put down the whole thing. Numbers was 3 questions. Algebra, here there were 4 questions, but I don't know whether there's a surprise like CAT also waiting and maybe more algebra this year. Only 2 DI sets, 1 table where there was 1 question easy, and then I put 2 zeros and still 3 questions, because out of that 1 table also 2 questions were considered wrong. So what has that told? Had announced that they are giving marks to all the students, 2 questions in DI and 1 question in quant also, which was a question on data sufficiency. So yeah, just to tell you that data sufficiency appears in XAT quant. You need to revise that well. Last year there were 2 questions. Up till before that they used to ask only 1 question. But with the number of questions going up maybe in quant, they had 2 questions of data sufficiency. So 2 questions in DI and 1 question of QA, which was data sufficiency, where marks were awarded were all students. So they said irrespective whether you had attempted or not, they gave marks to everybody. And the other was a graph, very weird looking graph, 1 easy, 1 medium, 1 difficult question. So total of 28 questions, 11 easy and 12 medium. And that is where we said the test has become easy to moderate. Hardly 3 difficult questions, okay, out of which 2 were in quant and 1 was in DI. So yeah, obviously you would waste a lot of time on that table questions, and after that the marks were given to everybody. So you know, some amount of luck also happens when marks are given to everybody for a couple of questions. Somebody could have just left that set and not wasted any time on it and still got marks for it, and somebody would have wasted 10 minutes on it and still got marks for it. But the point is, I wasted 10 minutes and you wasted nothing and still got marks. That doesn't remain fair. So that's also one more issue with such questions, so please be careful. QADI cutoffs, good 18 to 20 questions we expected to attempt, expected cutoff 10 to 12 marks. Again, as I said, go back to the table if you feel. This 10 to 12 I think will go up a little bit. Maybe last year also it went up a little bit, and you need to be very careful with that cutoffs. That 10 to 12 might not be a correct number. You can go through the table which I have explained to you. Now, so that completes the part A. We've talked about all the 3 sections and everything. Now let's come to part B, the GK section and the essay. So GK has 25 questions, generally difficult GK, not very straightforward GK. 12 to 13 static GK questions, which means GK which can be asked from any year, 20 years back, 50 years back or whatever. And 12 to 13 current affair questions. Now current affairs is something at least which you have been reading your newspaper for the last 1.5 years. At least you could have done better. No negative marking in this section, that's the best part. And the cutoffs are not very high, and also it does not count towards the XAT percentile. So, you know, you're not worried if you're applying, you will at least get a call. Yes, they will consider it in the second round during the PI round, but at least you'll get a call for the first part is done. 15 serious attempts. When I mean 15 serious attempts, which means 15 questions out of which you felt that you really know some of them. You know, you've heard of those things. And then the remaining 10 are going to be random wild guesses. Good score 6 to 7. Now, logically, if you have 25 questions and if you attempt, if you take a probability, if there are 5 options, and if you take a probability also, you should get 5 right. Right? And the good score is 6 to 7. So normally GK cutoff, you should not worry. Even if you get 4 or 5 questions correct through your knowledge, that means you knew the answer for those questions, then the remaining 2 or 3, I'm sure you will get it through luck. Keeping your fingers crossed there. Okay. Let's look at the second part, the essay part. Now, essay logic keeps changing. Last year, they asked an essay which was very different. Let's read what they've spoken about. Choose one of the 3 arguments given below and develop a coherent essay that critically evaluates it. Again, critical reasoning. Support your analysis with relevant claims, reasons, and examples. The essay should not exceed 250 words. Very, very, very important. When they say they want it at 250 words, they definitely want it at 250 words. So please remember that. Okay. Argument 1. So they're going 3. Risk is essential need of the soul. The absence of it produces a kind of boredom which paralyzes in a different way from fear, but almost as much. So they're saying that if you don't take risk, you will get bored, and that boredom is equivalent to fear in your life. Good topic. If you really can critically evaluate it, it's a very nice topic, and so on. There are 3 points, 3 arguments were given, and you have to write an essay about it. While before that, they had a topic or something like this. Any one of this is the XAT 22. Capitalism and democracy follow different logics. So again, this is a very general topic, at least something which you can have read and you can write about. And otherwise, in management, we do not need people who have never experienced setbacks. So, you know, when I read this, I always remember one of the things from Harsha Bogle's earlier videos, where he said that in Australia, when they have like a Navy SEAL team or something like that, like a commando team, where they select people only who have failed before. If you have never failed, you are not selected. The logic is very nice that if you have never failed before and if you suddenly face failure, you will not know how to react to it. So that's a very interesting topic here also. Maybe I would have given that thing from about the Australian Navy SEAL or Commando team in such an example. So these are the part of the GK section and the essay section, part B. Now let's talk about the prep plan. Working on developing verbal ability. So your verbal ability has to be slightly more developed than what you do for CAT. Critical reasoning, one of the key things, increase reading speeds, practice decision making. No way is somebody clearing the cutoff if they haven't solved enough decision making. For me, enough would be minimum the 5 mocks we are talking about, plus the last 4-5 years ka XAT papers, plus the 3 decision making workshops which we have. That is the bare minimum I want people to solve. If you haven't solved, which would mean roughly around 100 cases of decision making. If you haven't done that, a lot of people have a feeling, this is a very tukka section. Lag gaya to lag gaya, nahi laga to nahi laga. It doesn't work that way. You always have to work towards it. There is some logic in decision making also, right? Resources, XAT workshops, under my IMS channel, my CAT and XAT workshops are clubbed together. You can read it from there. Practice a bit of GK every day. Even if you count, say, 1 month to XAT, you can have enough time to practice GK every day. Even if you practice, say, 30, 40 questions every day, you would have practiced around 300, 400 questions. 10 mocks to ace the test, 5 passed XAT and 5 IMS mocks. That is the bare minimum you need to do. So with that, we come to the end of this video. Hope the video helps you to understand how to attempt XAT and so on, how to go about each section and how to go about your preparation. Best of luck for the XAT.